Welcome. Good morning and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Jessica Pearson and I'm here with my colleague Rachel Wildfur and an illustrious panel that I'll introduce in a moment. Today, I direct the Center for Policy Research and the Fatherhood Research and Practice Network. Center for Policy Research is a nonprofit research organization in Denver, Colorado, and Fatherhood Research Network, FRPN, is a national network established in 2013 to promote rigorous evaluation of fatherhood programs and to stimulate development of father inclusion policies and programs. And the purpose of today's webinar is to introduce a new resource on fathers, the state of fathers in America. It's called the Policies and Programs That Affecting Fathers, a state-by-state report. The report is available on www.frpn.org. So please subscribe to our newsletter, The Blueprint, at that website to receive chapters of this report as they are released over the next several months. This webinar is being recorded and the slides and the recording from today's webinar will be posted on the website. And we will, lastly, we'll be taking questions from the audience. So please enter your questions in the Q&A box as you think of them, but we're going to hold the questions until the end. So now, on the next slide, you'll see your panel. I'm joined today with several policymakers and stakeholders who work with fathers on a routine basis. Shanine Moore, who is the Child Support Director for the state of Minnesota. David Bryant, who is a fatherhood specialist at the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services. Chris Brown, who's the president of the National Fatherhood Initiative. So, what is this new report? Well, we're feasible. We focus on low-income and non-resident fathers, and we've compiled information on policies and programs that support the engagement of these fathers with their children in the 50 states and the District of Columbia, in 10 areas of public life. They're listed below. And so as of so far, we have released 3 reports. First, the chapters on child support, child welfare, and criminal justice, which we will be discussing today. But over the next several months, we'll be releasing the chapters in these remaining areas. We've gathered this information from a lot of different public sources, the National Conference of State Legislatures, the Intergovernmental Reference Guide that the Office of Child Support Enforcement comes out with. We've reviewed state plans that state agencies release about their activities. We've data reports put out by federal agencies like the Children's Bureau and the Centers for Disease Control, and information compiled by advocacy and research organizations. And we hope to identify supportive policies, establish a baseline, stimulate better measurement of father inclusion and father status going forward, and inspire research on the effects of these policies. What difference does it make to have policies for fathers and their families? Why are we doing this? The next slide, you'll see that this ambitious project is because we know from research that children with positively involved fathers have better outcomes, that for low-income, non-resident fathers, there are many barriers to positive engagement with their children. We know that while there are many wonderful state-by-state assessments on children and families, like Kids Count and the State of America's Children, to name just two, fathers are only glancingly included. Generally, information on a state minimum wage or the existence of a father leave policy in the state is what's included, but not much beyond that. There are national report cards on father involvement that the National Parents Organization puts out, and they deal with joint custody and shared parenting, which is very important, but they focus on those areas. We know that many other areas are relevant in state policy, and they affect fathers directly and indirectly. We know that states too can help to fund programs that are relevant for this population and access the federal funding through existing channels and money that's going to be coming through to states through infrastructure and coronavirus relief as in the years ahead. The first area we're going to discuss deals with child support. And this area affects fathers in many fathers in direct ways. 1/4 of all children in America are involved with the child support program, half of all poor children. So we're talking about 15 million cases nationwide. And the program collected $35 billion in fiscal year 2020, which lifted many children out of poverty, but also created poverty for many non-custodial parents and their new families. One area of policy that's very relevant deals with low-income adjustments or self-support reserves. Basically, per a recent federal rule, states have to consider the subsistence needs of non-custodial parents. Those are parents, generally fathers, who do not live with their children, in creating child support guidance orders, which are established in every state according to a mathematical formula. And so they need to consider taking into account some money for a non-custodial parent to survive, meet minimal needs, which is generally set at the federal poverty guideline for one person, which in 2021 was $1,073 per month. In actual fact, state guidelines levels, reserve levels range from a low of 500 per month to up to actually 1,500 per month. And we can see that about half the states, 53%, are at the $1,073 a month or above, but the other states are not. Back the previous policy slide, the other states are not at that level. Another policy area that's relevant deals with interest charged on unpaid support. And that ranges from no interest, which is the case in 20 states, or interest, there's an interest on the books, but it's not collected in another 4 states. But in the remaining states, it goes, interest charges range from 2% to 12% compounded. And in a bunch of states, they are tied to rates established by the Federal Reserve. Big variation. Variation also exists in the threshold for modifying child support orders. That refers to the amount of change in your order that you're required to have in order to qualify for consideration of a change in less than 3 years, every 3 years. And that ranges from 10% change to 30% change. And some states, 14 states, don't spell it out. They just say substantial change. So big variation, and in some states, big barriers to consideration of a modification. Another policy on the next slide shows it deals with pass-through policies. And this refers to a state's decision to give the money that a non-custodial parent pays to families if their children, or to withhold it and use it to reimburse the state for welfare or for public assistance that the state is paying for families. So in 26 states and a District of Columbia, any child support money that a parent pays while his children are on public assistance is passed through, at least $50 for one child and up to $200 for multiple children. In 24 states, none of the money is passed through. It's all kept for welfare reimbursement, and one state passes through 100%. Work-oriented programs for non-custodial parents, still another policy or program that's very relevant. These are programs for unemployed and underemployed non-custodial parents in 13 states. They exist statewide. In 18 states and District of Columbia, they exist in selected jurisdiction, and in 19 states, they do not exist. Child support is not involved with promoting or coordinating with them. Finally, debt compromise policies. This deals with the forgiveness or reduction in child support debt that it's owed to the state, money owed to the state. We're not talking about money owed to the other parent. And while the policies exist in almost all states, in most states, they tend to be very much case-by-case decisions by workers or by an office, child support office. In only 10 states in the District of Columbia are they robust and more systematic and used more routinely. The next area we look at, next chapter that we've released, deals with child welfare policies and programs. And we know from research that children in the child welfare system who have involved fathers who've been identified and are engaged in the child welfare agency, do better. They are less apt to be removed. They stay in the child welfare system for a shorter period of time. They leave the child welfare systems sooner. We also know that the levels of engagement with fathers falls below levels of engagement with mothers and is seriously wanting. We get some of that information from Child and Family Service reviews, which are conducted by the Children's Bureau, and they based on a sample of foster care cases in every state. We also review child and family service plans that states submit, and we found that in 20 states, they report that they do staff training on father engagement. That's 39% of states. In 4 states, there is a specific staff specialist or contractor focuses on father engagement. One of them, Dave Bryant, is with us today. in 17 states. There's some offering of parenting skills or fatherhood classes for fathers whose children are in the system. And in 12 states, the Child Protective Services Agency participates in a council or committee that deals with fatherhood issues. Other father engagement activity is pretty modest. There have been some federal demonstration projects. Children's trust programs exist in 47 states. They deal with prevention and treatment programs. In 11 of those states, fatherhood is an active concern and is part of their programming. And in the new Families First legislation, we have 5 states mention fathers and paternity in their plans, but generally fathers are not at this point the focus of Families First programming. The third area that we want to discuss today deals with criminal justice policies and programs. We know that half of all state inmates are parents with minor children, and most are fathers, and that incarceration has profound financial and emotional consequences and behavioral consequences for their children. And states have many laws, huge number of laws that deal with incarceration, reintegration, the ability of ex-offenders to pursue various economic opportunities and employment after they leave prison. And they all have very great, extensive consequences for the ability of non-custodial parents and fathers to maintain relationships with their children, both during and following their incarceration. So in this chapter, we outline expungement and sealing laws that deal with restricting access of to criminal records once people leave the prison, diversion programs which try to steer individuals away from conviction at the front end of a criminal justice case and avoid incarceration. We deal with automatic record sealing laws which limit access to criminal records, record clearing initiatives to seal criminal records, and in the most progressive states, this happens automatically. In other places, it requires an extensive application and administrative process to make this happen. Ban the box laws that limit the ability of employers to ask about criminal history at job application for both public and private jobs. Laws that limit consideration of criminal records in regulated occupations like barbering or construction trades. We look at technical violations to parole, which are the cause of 25% of all state admissions. In some states, up to 79% of incarcerations are due to technical violations of paroles. And some states are starting to reform them. And other states, not at all, and some are putting their toe in the water. Finally, we look at parenting incarceration. And only 7 states now have a legislation to consider parenting during sentencing and facility selection in order to maximize the possibility of maintaining parent-child relationships. 20 states in DC offer parenting classes for fathers at every DOC facility. We don't know what proportion of fathers participate, but they're offered, and another 10 facilities states offer them at least some DOC facilities. So what can we conclude at this point? Well, our takeaways are that while there are few direct policies for low-income fathers that can be measured in every state, there are many indirect ones that can be measured. We see that most states lack supportive policies, about a third in some areas, about a third of states do. At best, for some policies, they get up to 50% or 48%. We know that interestingly, state performance isn't consistent within a single area of public life. So they can have a strong policy dealing with interests, but not have employment programs or debt compromise. That's programs that are well developed. And across areas, there isn't always a lot of consistency. A state like Texas does not have a self-support reserve in its child support guideline, but it's one of the few states that has someone like David on staff. So it isn't consistent across areas. From doing this review, we've learned that interested states can find many examples of strong policy and programs to adopt, and stakeholders can hopefully use this type of information to urge states to adopt supportive policies. And finally, we know that knowing where we stand is a first step, and measurement and tracking is where we need to start going forward. So I'm going to stop talking and turn to our panel now and ask each of you to react a little bit to what we've compiled and the measures we've identified and the patterns we've presented. And let's start with child support and Shanine.
All right, thank you, Jessica. First of all, I want to say thank you to you and Rachel for inviting me today. Secondly, thank you for the report and information you have collected here for all of us to consider moving our programs forward. This is a huge step forward, in my opinion. And my initial reaction is that you have highlighted some very critical areas within the child support program that I believe some of my colleagues, we're working towards, and others, I'd like to invite them to, dig deeper into, what's happening within their states. I think there's an opportunity as an overall program for all of us to, implement these policy changes, which will ultimately help the people that we see showing up in our programs, in particular our low-income families.
David, what about child welfare?
Yes, ma'am. I also want to echo the words of Shanine and thanking you all for this opportunity to share time with you all today. Also, thank you for your time in compiling all the information. I liken it to like a page turner, like a good novel, right? It's like each chapter, it's like it keeps getting better and better, keep turning the pages. And so when I read the initial reaction, my initial reaction of the child welfare piece of it, as far as a nation, is that we have some work to do. It's a great assessment. I love seeing it. I love reading it. And just initially, it's like, okay, that's a good baseline, right? That's a good baseline. Now I know where now we know we can only go up as a state, right? It's looking at, okay, where's my name on the state? So it's like, go out for our audition football team, right? And say, did I make the team? Okay, I go down the list. There we are. Oh, I can do better. And just like even working with fathers, right? Some fathers don't want to go to the doctor because they don't want to know what's wrong with them. But when you find out what the pattern is, what's wrong, the barrier, you can fix it. So I liken it to that. As a state, the initial reaction is, okay, we have some work to do. But that's great because fathers are important and we can work together to improve the well-being of a child and children when we engage fathers.
Thank you. What about you, Chris? What's your takeaway from this mass? You're on mute.
Sorry, I wouldn't call it a mass or a mess. I would definitely call it a mass. I was very, very impressed with the work that CPR and FRPN did on compiling this report. It's so extensive. It's unlike anything that I've ever seen before, and we are so excited at NFI about distributing this information and disseminating it so that people can use it widely. So there's no doubt that these are very excellent measures. They're very comprehensive. When you talk about criminal justice, we're really pleased to see growing interest in fatherhood programming as part of successful rehabilitation and reentry efforts. One of the things that I would say that we could look at adding in the future is data on what's happening in corrections facilities in U.S. territories and also on Native American reservations. So, our Inside Out Dad program, for example, is being used on Native American reservations where they have corrections facilities. So it would be good to know, to what extent, work is being done with fathers in those territories and on those reservations.
Okay. That's the supplement, the next report. So how can this be used by practitioners and stakeholders to try to make state policies, to try to make change? Suggestions, examples? What do you think?
I can jump in. This is
Go
Shanine.
ahead.
So, as I mentioned in my first response, I think there's opportunity for, especially in the child support world, to implement some of these changes. We're seeing, the requests and asks, changes that are happening at the federal level. And so I feel like there's room for change in the child support program overall. And so again, I would challenge states that are interested in this work and doing this work, that they should engage and start having these conversations. But I want to speak a little bit about my state because I think we're doing a lot in these various areas that were identified in the child support chapter. I would say, over this last 2 to 3 years since the pandemic, we have done a lot of work in moving our program forward. For instance, we finally have passed legislation around interest elimination, which took us some time to do. However, this year we will finally be over the hill with interest charging in our state. And so that's very important. My team is working very hard right now to get that legislation implemented. So kudos to the team and Minnesota. So we're going to be on the other side of this here shortly. I would say also for guidelines changes, that's another big hurdle that we are working to overcome, in particular, keeping in mind the impact that child support is having on low-income families. And so we have a huge initiative and lift in implementing legislation that was passed last session, but by January 2023, we're focusing on, changes in our self-support reserve, changes in setting order amounts for low-income families that meet a certain income threshold. We're looking at, determining children that should be included in the calculation of that support order that previously were not considered. So there are a lot of different things that I believe that we're moving forward that will be beneficial to fathers, in particular low-income fathers. I would also say, from the federal grant funding perspective and some of the procedural justice projects we've been involved in particular, I want to first talk about the driver's license suspension project, because that one's kind of near and dear to me. But, just this morning, I got an update from my team. In Minnesota, we're doing a pilot around procedural justice with some of our county partners. And the goal of that whole project is to take a look at driver's license suspension and the impact that it is having on program participants. And so, my team shared some very interesting data with me this morning regarding, what we're seeing so far. Our pilot is unique in that we have also taken into consideration equity components and, wanting counties to engage with us on cultural competency and implicit bias and the things that also impact a lot of these enforcement remedies, unfortunately. And so hopefully by May or June or later this summer, we're going to have a wonderful evaluation report to share with everyone around this work. But I can't be more proud of my team and the work we're doing here in Minnesota around some of these very important issues.
That's great, thanks. I mean, one of the things we wanted to measure in child support but could not, because the information just isn't out there, is use of and how different enforcement remedies are used in the states, and particularly with driver's license. Is it done automatically, or does it involve, at some point, does a worker get to actually look or have to look at the case and see, oh, can this person does this person have the ability to pay and press the button to make in a license suspension happen? Is there manual intervention? And that information just isn't available nationally. It should be, but it's not.
Yeah, and so a part of our pilot is to look at some of those exact issues. When we don't automate it, what does that look like for people?
Right.
And we had a story that my team shared this morning, but it has to be just more than this automatic response that we've had for so many years. It's time that we really dig into the customer service aspect of our program, because I feel that if we do that, we have a better understanding and impact on participants.
Great. What about you, David? What about how can practitioners and stakeholders use this information, and how did you get how does Texas have a fatherhood coordinator, one of 3 states with a staff person who, like you?
Sure. Yes. I think I value my position, and I think the state of Texas is ahead of the curve in hiring not only one fatherhood specialist, but 2. So I represent, I'm in the prevention and intervention side of the DFPS system. And then we also have someone directly in the intervention, working directly with CPS services and so forth, child protective services. So I think that's very unique across the nation. One thing I think that could happen is how do stakeholders use this information is truly asking a few questions, right? Doing a self-assessment. So it's like, 1, do I believe in the core mission of what I'm charged to do? Do I believe in keeping children safe? Do I believe in the child maltreatment and preventing that, right, and stopping that? And so, of course, the answer should be yes. And then also understanding, well, fathers and father figures play a huge part of that practice. They play a huge part of keeping children safe. And so in order to, and understanding the research, understanding the value of fathers, from everyone who answers the phone to people who are making the decisions. If people understand the value of fathers and father figures and how they play a part into the child well-being, I think they'll get it. And then they'll be able to shape and make better decisions from there, as far as engaging fathers, engaging programs from the stakeholder level all the way to the local level. So it's understanding that piece of the puzzle. I also believe that when you do that, you're able to have a deeper reach, and then able to reach out to local fatherhood champions, right? Local fatherhood champions within that state, fatherhood programs that are doing well, that can, 1, help train staff, Because when you look at the child, the chapter that was produced by you also well and really done, it highlighted some areas like, promoting father and child relationships. Are the staff trained? Are staff actually engaging dads, not just doing what has been convenient for many years, just engaging mothers and the parental part of the side? Dads are fathers too. So when you understand the research, you understand that, look, I can go the extra mile. I can do what I need to do to engage fathers. So having the people, everyone trained about father engagement, and that needs to come up as you all measured. It's doing okay, but we can do better as far as states, making sure that people are trained in father engagement, making sure that you're highlighting those father champions and networking. When we talk to fathers, even when I talk to my counterpart, who is also a fatherhood specialist on the prevention side, intervention. So I work with PEI, prevention and early intervention, where we try to go as far as upstream as possible to prevent child maltreatment. And he's on the backside where they're already involved in the system. And so how can we help support fathers from either way? So I think when states realize the value, they'll be creative about making space and funding positions like myself, because it's so needed. When fathers are involved in the system, they can pick up the phone and call somebody like myself or my counterpart that works at the state level and hear someone in the system that says, man, I hear you. Yeah, right. I know you're going through a challenge and I know that it's tough. You'll get through this. Let me connect you to some resources that can help circumvent you and help navigate you to where you need to be to do better and to be the best father you can be for your children, despite the barriers that are present. So just understanding that research and then putting things in place to wrap around the family, wrap around that child, that family, that parent, that mother, that father figure, I think would be important. So ultimately, it's understanding the value of fathers. When you get it, you'll get it, it'll click, and then you'll do the necessary work across the board from countywide, citywide to statewide.
Okay. Chris, what would you suggest that stakeholders and practitioners, how they can use this information to kind of nudge state policy?
Well, let me just build off of something that David and Shanine said. So first of all, another shout out to my home state of Texas, which is in the Office of the Attorney General. They also have a dedicated fatherhood position, which was just filled by a gentleman named Joshua Banks, who comes from the Housing Authority of the City of Austin, where they run fatherhood programs as well. So they're doing some very creative things at the OAG's office to focus that particular office on family strengthening as opposed to child support collection. The other thing that Shanine really points to in terms of the suspension of driver's licenses is something that we have to think about when we're talking about, what state policies are going to be most effective for father involvement, which has to do with thinking through the second and third order consequences of decisions. So when you suspend someone's driver's license, what's the consequence of that? Okay, you have to look beyond the punitive aspect of some of these policies. So when you suspend somebody's driver's license, what's the impact on employment? Then you have to ask, well, if it's impacting employment negatively, then what's the impact of negative employment? And so if you just follow that trail out, you can see lots of subsequent negative impacts. And so it's great that the state of Minnesota is kind of looking at that particular policy and what's the impact. But when you talk about what practitioners can do from the perspective of criminal justice based on the content of this report, I think that it's really useful from a general perspective to help practitioners and stakeholders understand the impact of a dad's criminal record on his ability to connect with his children and family prior to release, and ability to connect with children and family and engage in those kind of vital activities like employment post-release. So, practitioners and stakeholders can use this data to identify in their states what tools are available, first of all, to avoid incarceration in the first place, namely diversion, and then to mitigate the impact of criminal records post-release. So one of the things that I like to think about in terms of impact is, there are a lot of things practitioners and stakeholders could do, but there's limited time, right? And we want to focus on the things that are going to be most effective. So I think from the information in the report, I think diversion is a huge game changer, potentially the most important one, because it avoids incarceration altogether so that the other tactics that we have post-release don't ever have to be employed. It also keeps dads involved with their kids who are already involved and increases the chances that those who aren't involved can become involved over time. And I think that courts or prosecutors that refer dads to a fatherhood program as a requirement or reward for diversion is a real vital connection. It's also great to see that there are combinations of diversion and parenting and other program treatments like in Oregon and similar programs in a few other states. It was really unfortunate for me, and I learned a ton, just a boatload of stuff from these reports, is that the finding alternatives to mass incarceration legislation proposed in Congress in 2020, which by the way has been reintroduced in 2021 and modeled after those state programs, didn't pass, because that would have affected, at least at the federal level, sentencing options for federal judges. But it has been reintroduced in the Senate by Senators Sanders and Wyden and 5 other senators, and also Representative Jayapal, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and 14 others in the House. What I was a little surprised to see, and I'm going to put a caveat here because I haven't read through the legislation, is that there aren't any Republicans either in the Senate or in the House that have signed on to support that particular legislation. And I don't know why. So I think if you're a stakeholder or a practitioner, that you might, and you have a representative either at the Senate level or in your district who is a Republican, maybe just contact their office and say, hey, do you know about this legislation? If so, what is your view of it, to kind of gather, information so that, perhaps this particular legislation can enjoy some bipartisan support, on down the line. I also think that fair chance employment is another game changer, because sort of regardless of the previous tactics that are mentioned in the report, it reduces the impact of a criminal record on employment. And what I like is that, some states are including occupations that are particularly relevant for low-income and non-resident dads. Then the final thing I'll say is that I think another area to focus on is how to reduce violations of probation and parole. It's a great place to sort of attack recidivism. Implementing fatherhood programs that serve dads on probation and parole is huge because it's all about reentry. And I think adopting that tactic, in addition to adopting one or more of the 8 policies identified by the Justice Reinvestment Initiative, could be particularly helpful in addressing that particular matter.
Thank you. Okay, quick final before we'll turn to QA. What is the next step? How should it be expanded upon to be more impactful? What do we need on our to-do list?
I can start, and you probably already know what I'm going to say, Jessica. But I think the focus and intent on equitable considerations is going to be key to understanding how these policies impact various communities. Just some initial information that, here in Minnesota, in some of the work that we've been doing and, in our driver's license suspension work in particular, we know from our data that driver's license suspension is one of those things that impact Black and Brown communities very differently.
Right.
And so, that's a policy that goes way, way back. And, society has changed a lot. And, the intent and purpose of that initial policy is not what we're seeing today. And
Right.
so when we have enforcement remedies like that in place, it adversely impacts people that, are very low income. We see in our state, and you've mentioned it, I think, in your report, $10,000 or less. So you're not only are you not earning a lot, but you've got this barrier, that's keeping you from working, potentially caring for your children, and being active with them. And so we have to move beyond some of these very punitive enforcement measures that are impacting Black and Brown communities.
Right. Well, and we have to start by first collecting the information so we can look at differences by race, in a lot of areas, we can't even find differences by sex. We could even find data just for men. It was low income, but no breakdown for females versus males.
Absolutely.
Chris and David, any more to add before we turn to the audience?
Sure, I'll just say one more thing just to add is definitely having that conversation, how we can do better across the board as a state, with fatherhood. And with that, with the state of Texas, seeing the need for fatherhood, especially like myself at the state level through the CPS side, through PEI, prevention and early intervention, and even as Chris mentioned, through the Attorney General. Now, we're talking, so as a state agency impacting fathers and impacting some of the same families, we're not in silos. So we're learning to talk together to see how can we work together to serve families across the board in many different sectors. And the second thing I would also mention is be creative. If you see the need and the need is there to keep children safe, be creative with funding, right? And the funding sources that are coming down, how can we create positions at a state level to reach out to fathers? And one thing that prevention and early intervention did was to use the CBCAP funding, right? The child abuse prevention funding to help create this position and fund our seven fatherhood programs across the state that work with fathers, that utilize curriculum that like NFI and other curriculum as well. So it's just making sure we have that conversation. And if you see the need, you can find funding. You see the need.
Are you using Families First funding for any of these positions?
But to my understanding, that I'm not totally sure, that might be also for some on the other side of it.
Okay.
But yes, ma'am, I know that that's come across our desk.
Okay, good. That's good to know. Chris,
final word? Yeah, sure. Just a couple of things. I mean, I think obviously, to make this information more impactful, practitioners and stakeholders can advocate in their states for helpful policies, using other states' helpful models for inspiration. A second thing is, I think that it'd be really cool. Another thing for CPR and FRPN to do is to create sort of an overall ranking where you take all of these different categories that are going to be the subjects of the chapters in the eventual full report and create a sort of an overall ranking for states. That would be kind of interesting. And then, one of the things that I want to mention in terms of, work that's done in the criminal justice system that we're heavily involved in at NFI is fatherhood programming that's run, while dads are incarcerated and then as they reenter society. And, one of the biggest challenges we see nationally is the approach in many states that gives individual decision makers in prisons, i.e. wardens, and sometimes they're called something else in other states, but the ability to determine which programs are implemented and policies around how contact with children and families is encouraged or facilitated or discouraged. And facilitators of our programs see a lot of variation. So I think that one of the things that would be interesting in the future is to identify state departments of corrections by which there are centralized and decentralized approach to determining which programs and policies are implemented in facilities across that state, which would then help practitioners and individuals know in that state sort of the unit of focus for reform efforts. Should that be the state DOC, where everything's going to be implemented statewide regardless, or are they going to have to conduct a campaign that's going to focus on individual facilities in the state?
Great point. Thank you. Rachel, what are people wanting to ask?
We got a lot of great questions and comments. It's kind of like piggybacking off what we're just talking about, some things that are questions, asking if we've looked into them, or just things to think about. So I'll just list a few ideas so we can get them in our head and then see if there's any specific questions we want to focus on. But thinking about the importance of state child welfare policies for young fathers that are currently in foster care. So thinking about policies that specifically focus on those fathers who are in foster care. Thinking about in terms of shared parenting and equal parenting presumptions, the fact that these arrangements might not always be in the best interest of children in families where the parents are unmarried, have limited financial and parenting resources, are low income, are teens, where there's a history of family violence. So thinking about the implications within that, in that there might be more complexity within certain families than others. Thinking about what the panel would recommend in terms of taking all of these findings and moving towards a statewide assessment of needs regarding fatherhood policies. So if anyone wants to jump in, respond to that, how we can take this information and the findings that we have and think about assessment of needs, or I can keep reading.
Anyone want to tackle? Young fathers, right?
Yeah, I can jump in really briefly, just depending how can we move forward, even addressing young fathers. I think what's been helpful, so prior to coming to work with the state, I was working directly with fathers myself. And one thing I loved was when we had coalition meetings, the interagency meetings that many states have, that many counties have, getting together to talk specifically, one, about children, child welfare, well-being, and two, fatherhood, right? We were able to have this conversation as a father, and even having summits or having conferences, and to get stakeholders to the table. Let's just sit down, let's talk. What can we do, right? And not just be performative, right? Oh, we talked about fathers next. No, what can we really do? What can we take away and then bring to our state legislators, right? Bring to our fatherhood champions within the state who directly are talking with our legislative body, and so we can make change. So making sure that we're having that conversation, whether it's young fathers or whether the policies we discussed today, and then seeing what we can do about that.
I would also say in Minnesota, we were awarded both cohort 1 and 2 of the economic responsibility grant funding.
Yes.
And so what we're planning to do with our project is we're partnering with one of those is Department of Corrections amongst other state agencies, but we are developing cumulative curriculum for young people between the ages of, I believe, 16 and 24. And, we're working heavily with Department of Corrections to test that curriculum. And it'll be, comprehensive education on child support and the process, and education around financial literacy and the court process and modification process and all the complex issues that occur within our program. And so we're looking forward to being able to utilize that curriculum with community partners, as well as sharing it across, the United States with other child support programs.
Chris, is there some young father curricula that NFI is works with states on?
Well, we have a guide on how to use our evidence-based 24/7 dad program with teen fathers. So as part of the work that we do, we look at how can our fatherhood curricula be modified or customized for specific types of fathers. And so we've had for many years practitioners around the country running the program with teen fathers, and we found that it's highly applicable, and that there's ways that the content in the curriculum can be customized for the unique challenges that teen dads face, and folks can download that guide from our website. But I don't know of a curriculum that's been specifically designed for teen fathers, although there might be one out there, but in terms of its availability nationally, I'm not aware of one.
Okay, well, we'll be discussing that in our chapter on responsible fatherhood down the road. But David, did you have something you want to add?
Just very quickly, yes, Shanine kind of jogged my memory. Our child support division also has something for young parents, young teenagers in the school, which is mandated in the health classes from 9th grade on up, to talk about parenting, paternity and parenting awareness. It's called the PAPA curriculum.
Right.
And they started that in the state of Texas.
Right.
And so it's something that addresses young fathers in its infancy as well.
Right.
Right. And
yeah.
let me mention, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Jessica, but let me
Oh.
just mention that I just had a conversation with a gentleman that I mentioned, Joshua Banks at the OAG's office, and they're starting to look at a comprehensive redesign of that PAPA curriculum. So that actually was created in the 1990s. So it's an old curriculum, let me put it that way, but it's great that they're looking at that with a fresh look. And that is something that folks can download and get directly from the OAG's office, and then hopefully they'll update it and release it a new edition sometime soon.
Okay, Rachel, is there anything else we can sneak in?
Yeah, so I'm kind of combining two questions here, but they're both regarding father engagement and father support engagement. So thinking about how we can obtain information on a county or region or state's performance with regard to the father's engagement. And then also wondering if the panelists have any advice for engaging fathers in fatherhood classes and fatherhood programming.
Well, we stay on the state level in our document. There are some things on county and city level engagement.
Yeah, I would recommend contacting your state child welfare office and seeing what data they might have as a starting point on what's happening at the county level. And then obviously, if you're looking at just focusing on your county or your city, contacting that office or that agency that's responsible for child welfare. Because again, some states you will have offices that are run by the state. And in other cases, they may contract with nonprofits, for example, to run offices. So it may vary depending on where you're located.
Yeah, and in Minnesota, we are state supervised, county administered. And so I was going to say that as well, Chris. At the state office, it's important, and we've started to have a lot of conversations, but bringing in county partners and working on a community engagement strategy together, I think is very important. Different county offices do different things as it pertains to fatherhood. And so there's opportunities for us to work collectively together on this work. I think will help us accomplish more.
And if I could add as well, our state, as far as in terms of engagement, all the advice that Janine and Chris just gave, I echo, and I would have said the same thing. Also, in terms of engagement, our state has done two things. Well, one thing, we created a website for our state, but it's open to everybody. It's called the Fatherhood Resource Hub. And on that, the Fatherhood Resource Hub, and people can download different things that are for stakeholders and providers that has research and so forth. And in that, it talks about engagement and retention and how to engage fathers, right? How to make sure that we're keeping fathers engaged, how to go about doing that. Also, I will be remiss if I did not mention NFI, which Christopher Brown's the president of, has great resources as well in engaging fathers and retaining fathers as well.
Yes, and as a matter of fact, let me just, I'm putting a URL into the chat window for everybody right now. So we have an entire web page dedicated free resources that we provide on recruitment and retention. So I put it in here. It's got a ton of links to free ebooks and things like that we have. So please do take advantage of that. Okay,
let's go to the resource slide next. And because we're coming to the end of our hour, here's the reference for this policy and programs affecting fathers. If you go to FRPN.org, you find also we have a lot of information on all of the issues that we've discussed. We regularly post new research on these issues pertaining to fatherhood programming, as well as research that we've sponsored, and these future chapters of this report will also be posted there. You have email addresses for Janine, David, and Chris down below, and myself. Rachel is at the same, also at Center for Policy Research. So please reach out and subscribe to FRPN.org Blueprint, and you will get this information automatically. Next two chapters will come out in March on early childhood and education. Then we're on to employment and family law, which covers parenting time and includes many, many issues pertaining to child support and parenting time and so forth. So it's been
Jessica,
yes.
may I give one more quick shout out to FRPN, and it's for this reason. FRPN has done some of the best research that I have seen, and I've been involved in this work more than 2 decades around innovative programs around father involvement. And so there's a ton of reports on the FRPN website. If you're interested in, what's going on that's innovative, that's been tested really well based on, great research, definitely subscribe to FRPN and go to the website and download to your heart's content.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Chris. We will be, in a few months, we'll do this again with a whole new set of topics. And I did get an email from someone who is going on a state child support guideline committee and wanted to use this report to, while they're on this guideline committee, to alert them to other state practices. So please use this to your heart's content. And thank you so much for joining today. Have a good rest of the day. Thanks to the
Thank
panel.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
And for the helpful comments and questions. Thank you.
Yes.